Shalom, my name is Joseph Shulam, and I am the retired founder of Netivyah Bible Instruction Ministry. And Israel has been now for 116 days at war, a very bitter war that started with a total failure of the Israeli military, police, and every other defense force that Israel had. In one day, 3,000 Palestinian Hamas terrorists invaded Israel, took over several settlements and a couple of towns, murdered very cruelly, from babies to old women to grandmothers. Over 1,300 people were murdered. Some of them were decapitated. Women were raped, and during the rape they were mutilated while being raped and then shot. Horrible. Really worse than the Nazi behavior. And it was done by Arabs. And Arabs are in a way cousins. The father of the Arab nations are essentially Ishmael and Esau. And the other neighbors of the land of Israel are also relatives. The Moabites, the Ammonites, they're the children of Lot, the nephew of Abraham. So this war that's been going on now for more than 100 years between the Arabs in the Middle East and the Israelis, the Jews that are returning home in fulfillment of prophecy. And it's not the first time in history that this has happened. During the days of Cyrus, during the Babylonian exile, when Persia became a power, and the Jews that were exiled from Judea became a forceful influence in the Persian Empire. And Cyrus gave them a decree to return back to the land that God gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, papers and money and license to rebuild the temple and the city of Jerusalem. Then too, the same people that object to the return, to the restoration, to the fulfillment of prophecy for the Jews in the 20th century and in the 21st century, the same people are the descendants of those that objected to the return of the Jews from Babylonian exile 500 BC, in the 5th century BC. Yeah. Well, where is the root of this? What is the root of all this conflict between Jews and Arabs and the neighbors that are all somehow related, relative, cousins? We're all children of Abraham, according to the Bible. What's the root? The root is this. Starts in Genesis. The rabbis rightfully said that everything has its roots in Genesis, in the book of Genesis, including, of course, the genealogy of Jesus starts in the book of Genesis, starts in Genesis chapter 5. This is the book of the genealogies of Adam. And that's how Matthew starts the gospel. This is the book of the genealogy of Yeshua, the Messiah, quoting from Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. Why does Matthew start with this? Because Adam didn't have a genealogy. He was created by God. So if God can take a lump of clay and make Adam from it, he has no problem of inseminating a woman with a human seed, Mary, and having Yeshua as the Son of God. But that's another topic. So it all starts with this, that Abraham and Sarah come to the land of Canaan. And God promises him already in chapter 12 that he will have a descendant, and that his descendant will become a blessing to all the nations. But years pass by. Abraham gets old. Sarah becomes 90 years old and she still doesn't have a baby, doesn't have a descendant. Abraham doesn't have a descendant. Sarah suggests that Abraham will take an Egyptian handmaid, servant of Sarah, have sex with her, and have a son, so that he will have an heir. Sarah jumped the gun, so did Abraham. Didn't have patience. And a son was born to Abraham from Hagar, the Egyptian servant, slave. But then in chapter 18 of Genesis, the three angels come and proclaim to Abraham and Sarah that Sarah will get pregnant. Sarah laughs and says, how could a woman that long time ago already has lost her fertility, she could have a baby now at the age of 90? She laughs, and then 9 months later, she has a son, and his name is Isaac, which means laugh. The root of the word laugh. And Isaac is born. And there's a big celebration in chapter 21. Abraham celebrates that Isaac was weaned around the age of 3. And of course, Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham. It was with her consent. It was her idea to begin with. But when Ishmael or Isaac is born, Ishmael is around a teenager, a young teenager. The rabbis say he was 17. The Bible doesn't say that, but he's already a teenager. And of course, Sarah and Hagar were very close to each other. They weren't enemies. But suddenly in Genesis chapter 21, verse 9, I'm going to start reading from verse 8, talking about Isaac. Genesis 21, verse 8. So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham. The word is used, scoffing. Scoffing is making fun, teasing, but not in the form that it is written in Hebrew. The word that is used in Hebrew is from the same root as Isaac, which means to laugh or to scoff, to make fun of. So Sarah sees Hagar's son Ishmael scoffing with Isaac. Verse 9 of chapter 21. So she goes to Abraham immediately and says, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely Isaac. Sarah understands whatever Ishmael was doing to Isaac was to neutralize, to neuter Isaac from being able to have children, from wanting to have children, so that Ishmael will be the heir of Isaac and all the blessings that God gave to Abraham and his seed forever. That's the root of the problem. already in Genesis chapter 21. But the word that is used here in Hebrew in chapter 21 verse 9, metzachek, is a very interesting word. It's a very interesting word because it appears several times in the book of Genesis, and the context is always sexual. The proof of this is in several texts in the book of Genesis, but not only in the book of Genesis. The next time it is the story of Abraham with Avimelech, the king of Gerar, and Avimelech looks at Sarah and she's a beautiful woman. No, I'm wrong. Sarah was already dead. Avimelech looks at Rebekah, who was very young, the wife of Isaac, and he sees through the window that Isaac metzachek with his wife, having sex with his wife. Same word as Sarah uses here in chapter 21 verse 9 of Genesis. But that's not the only time. The next big time is actually in the book of Genesis still, and it is with the story of Joseph in chapter 39 of Genesis. Joseph has become the economos in the Greek Bible, in other words, the steward, the chief steward of Potiphar's household, trusted servant of a priest of On, Egyptian priest, running his whole house, a very powerful figure in Egypt. He was imprisoned in Egypt for many years. From prison, he was put in prison because of this accusation of the wife of his boss, of Potiphar, that he tried to have sex with his wife. And she says what happened, that he came and tried to. I'm going to read to you from Genesis 39 verse 11, from the Hebrew translation of the 5 books of Moses. One such day he came into the house to do his work. None of the household servants being there inside the house. There was nobody in the house except Joseph and the wife of Potiphar. The next verse, verse 12. And she caught hold of him and of his garment and said, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and got away and fled outside. Joseph. When she saw that he had left in her hand the garment and fled outside, she called out to her servants and said to them, "Look, he had to bring us a Hebrew to dally," metzachek, the same word that is in Genesis 21 verse 9, to dally with us. This one came to lay with me, to sleep with me, to have sex with me. But I screamed loud. And when he heard me screaming at the top of my voice, he left his garment with me and got away and fled outside. On that accusation, Joseph goes to jail. Yeah, because that same word is in this context, and in the context with Rebekah and Avimelech, and in the story of Sarah seeing Ishmael scoffing, having sex, ruining Isaac. Now this is the root of all the conflict, right there. But it's not the only root. There are many more roots. Yes. The next big deal is again problem with brothers. Rebekah is the wife of Isaac. But Isaac was 40. That the book of Genesis tells us that when Isaac married Rebekah, she was young, around 18, and Isaac was 40. What is this? Why was Isaac 40 and he didn't even look for a wife? Abraham had to send his servant to look for a wife for him. Because yes, Ishmael succeeded in taking away the desire for sex with a woman from Isaac. And he gets married to Rebekah. He's 40 and she's like around 18. And from then on, she runs his life and the life of her son. And that in her womb, it says, and it's quoted in the New Testament also, that the two boys in her womb were already fighting with each other in her womb before they got born, before they came out to daylight. And so that, the second round of problems in the family, of scandal in the family, between Esau and Jacob. It says Jacob was a man sitting in the tent, meditating. And Esau was outside hunting. He was an outdoorsman. And Jacob kind of takes advantage of Esau's simplicity. And Esau comes from the hunting hungry, and his brother Jacob, instead of treating him like a brother, treated him like a businessman and sold him some red soup, maybe lentil soup, red lentil soup, in order to get his inheritance, because he came out first from Rebekah's womb. He was the oldest, maybe seconds, maybe minutes, but he was the oldest. So that enmity adds to the enmity between Ishmael and Isaac. And now it's between Esau and Jacob. In the family. Those are the roots of the conflict. It's about inheritance. And a part of the inheritance is spiritual, and a part of the inheritance is the land. The land that God gave to Abraham and to his seed as an eternal inheritance. But it's not only the land. It's the spiritual inheritance of who is going to bring a blessing to the whole world. And long before the Jews returned to this land, in the end of the 19th century, beginning in the end of the 19th century, long before that, the Jews and the Arabs were already at each other's with hate. But not always. There were 500 years of the golden era of Jewish history when the Jews were in Spain, not in the land of Israel, but in Spain and Portugal in the Iberian Peninsula. 500 years that is called the golden era of Jewish history under Muslim rule. How could that be? Maimonides, the great rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, was the medical doctor of the caliph that ruled from the Atlantic Ocean, the 1040 parallel, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, the biggest empire ever, and one of the richest empires ever, was Arab. And the Jews were the administrators of that empire. They were the doctors and the professors in the universities and the merchants that had shipping between Spain and Portugal and India and Philippines and Indonesia and Malaysia, all the way to Asia and the Pacific Ocean. Yes, a Jewish woman, Hebrew name Esther Nasi, the Christian name because she was forced to convert to Catholicism, like all the Jews in the Spanish and Portuguese empires. She was Dona Gracia. She became a widow at the age of 22. She had a daughter that when her husband died, and she and her daughter and her sister created the Dutch West Indies shipping company that brought Jews from Spain to Portugal and then from Spain to India. There are two provinces in India, Goa and Kerala, that were there is a lot of hidden Jews there with names like Pinto, De Costa, Alvarez, Nunes, Miranda, Mendez, Diaz. You see Indians talking like that, shaking their head, talking like that, but they're Jews, hidden Jews that ran away to Asia. So when the Jews were not in the land, the Arabs and the Jews got along, although the Arabs looked at Christians and Jews under a Muslim law called Minya, and they looked at them as inferior human beings with lesser rights. And as long as the Jews and the Christians were happy to have lesser rights than the Muslims, then they got along just fine. The only problem is that Israel doesn't take lesser rights than anybody and shouldn't. The Arabs have equal rights in Israel. The Druze have equal rights in Israel. The Christians have equal rights in Israel. So those are the historical roots, but that doesn't end there. It doesn't end there, because we had another time when Jews were in exile, and they came back. That is, the Jews were sent to exile by God to Babylon. We have the book of Daniel that was written in Babylon. We have the book of Ezekiel, prophet, written in Babylon. We have the stories of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three Hebrew children that were cast into the furnace, and came out alive. So Cyrus came into power. We have that record in the book of Isaiah, and he gives the people that were in the highest offices in the Persian Empire, Ezra and Nehemiah. Nehemiah was like the prime minister of the Persian Empire in the days of Cyrus. He gives them a lot of money and sends them back to the land of Israel and to Jerusalem to rebuild Jerusalem and to rebuild the wall. They came with authority from, like, it would be comparable to United States. Comparable to United States. And we can read the text from Nehemiah. We'll go to Nehemiah now. Nehemiah. And we'll go to chapter 2 of Nehemiah. Chapter 2. And we'll go to verse 19 of Nehemiah chapter 2. Nehemiah, Nehemiah in Hebrew, chapter 2 and verse 19. And let's read what happened. They came with authority from the most powerful country in their day. Now I'm still in Genesis. What is this? Nehemiah. I'm having trouble today. Chapter 2 of Nehemiah and verse 19. Okay, I'm reading to you from Nehemiah. This is the return from the exile the first time. But when Sanballat the Horite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard that the Jews are returning, that are rebuilding Jerusalem, they laughed at us, despised us, and said, "What is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king?" I mean, they don't realize that the king sent them. So they're already objecting to the return of the Jews to the land of Israel the first time when there was a return from the exile. But that's not the only time. In Nehemiah chapter 4. Let's go to Nehemiah chapter 4. Verse 1. Chapter 4, verse 1. Again, chapter 4, verse 1 of Nehemiah. It's in English, in Hebrew, it's chapter 4, verse 1. In English, chapter 4, verse 7. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, both of them Arabs, the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the wall of Jerusalem is being restored and the gaps, the holes in it, were beginning to be closed, that they became very angry. And all of them conspired together to come, attack Jerusalem, and create confusion. Nevertheless, verse 9, we made our prayers to God, and because of them, we set watch against them day and night. In other words, the neighbors, the Arab neighbors, wanted to destroy what the Jews built, and the Jews set watch day and night to keep their neighbors from destroying what they built. They're mentioned again, the same thing is mentioned again in chapter 6 of Nehemiah. Chapter 6 of Nehemiah in verse 1 also. It may be different in English. Chapter 6 verse 1, and it's okay, the same as in English. Now it happened when the Sanballat, the Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall, that there were no breaks left in it. And that time I had not hung the doors of the gates yet. And Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, "Come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Ono." But they thought to do me harm. They tried to trap Ezra and Nehemiah to come in. These are the biblical roots of the conflict between Israel and its neighbors. The conflict is spiritual to begin with, because when Muhammad came into power and he went to Medina and there was a large group of Jews there, he tried to wipe them all out. They did nothing to him. They did nothing to him. But he slaughtered many of them. Those are the roots of what's happening today, folks. And Christians should know, and Jews should know, that the problem is not land. The Arabs have lots of land. There are 7 countries close by to us are all Arab. Some of them are very rich. They have oil. We have made peace with some of them, and we're about to make peace with Saudi Arabia as well. Those are the roots, folks. And Christians and Jews and the world should know that the roots are spiritual. The roots have to do with what God had designed for history. Not only history of the world. No, I should reverse it. Not only Israel of the Jews and the Arabs, history of the world. Because God, when He called Abraham, He said that Abraham and his seed will be a blessing to all the world. That those that bless them will be blessed, and those that curse them will be cursed. Look at the Arab world. Look at the Palestinians. When Israel had the 6-day war and took Judea and Samaria and the Golan Heights, I traveled in the villages that today are flourishing with wealth. Private people built themselves houses that are 5-6 stories tall, driving Mercedes cars, and better than Mercedes as well. There is no Arabs better educated than the Palestinian Arabs, because they were educated here in Israel to begin with. The doctors in the hospitals of Israel are at least 30% Arabs that were trained in Israel, maybe in Italy as well, maybe in Romania. Yeah. But most of them were trained here in Israel. We have believers, brothers who are Arabs, who studied here in the Hebrew University, in the Hadassah School of Medicine. And they are very successful doctors in America right now. You should know, my dear brothers and sisters around the world, that the problem is spiritual from the beginning, when Ishmael tried to neuter Isaac from preventing him from having children that will carry on the promises that God gave Abraham, his father, to the end of history, to Revelation chapter 22, when there will be a new Jerusalem with the names of the 12 tribes on the gates. King Henry's name from England, that beheaded 5 of his wives, is not going to be on the gates of the New Jerusalem. Neither will be Luther, Martin Luther, nor John Calvin be on the gates of Jerusalem. It'll be Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, with the 12 Jewish apostles on those gates. Yes, what happened on the 7th of October 2023 was something that was planned for years by the Hamas. Hamas is a biblical word. Hamas is a biblical word. It means violence, translated to English as violence. Yes, those are the roots. And what they did, they planned for several years, meticulously planned. They planned to burn people alive in their houses. They planned to kidnap girls and rape them on the way and mutilate their bodies. And some of them they shot after they raped and mutilated them and left them laying there on the side of the road. They planned to do such horrible things to instill fear in the souls of the Jewish people in Israel and around the world. But they didn't succeed that, because our paradigm is from the book of Exodus chapter 1, where it says, the more they persecuted them, the more they grew. The more they pressed us, the more we succeeded. The stories coming out of Gaza are absolutely horrible. We still have 120, near 130 hostages. Some of them are babies. They killed their parents in front of the babies. Are hostages in Gaza. So, dear brothers and sisters, yes, we need you. We need your prayers more than anything. But we also need your financial help. If you're Americans and you need tax credit, go to Netivyah in the United States, make your contribution there. You can see it on the prayer list. There's a button for contributions in Israel for those that don't need tax credit, and there's a button for contributions in the United States for those who do need tax credit from the United States. Press the button. If you're American and you need tax credit, press the button for support, because we have given literally millions of shekels, which means also probably close to $2 million of equipment. The office here next door to this studio was full, and still is at least half full, of equipment. I just saw very high-tech flashlights that they put on the helmet. We gave hundreds of helmets, contributed for the soldiers from Taiwan. Hundreds of warm clothes, jackets, and socks, and whatever, to keep the soldiers that are up in Hermon, where there is now about 1 meter snow covering the mountain. And our soldiers are guarding there. And sorry to say, the Israeli army kind of neglected. They were dealing with internal problems for several years that our government was dilly-dallying with, trying to neuter the Supreme Court of Israel, so they have absolute control. Yes, but God is great, and He prevented that. And one of the ways that He prevented that, and forced the people of Israel to reunite as a nation, to bond together again by the pressure of the war and the hatred of our enemies, has produced love between each other. Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, including the Druze and the Arabs who live in the land of Israel, have bonded, are serving in the Israeli army, and they have also fallen as victims of this war. Both Druze and several Arabs have. Yes. Stand with Israel. Fight for Israel. Because the future, not only of the Jews in the world, but of Christianity in the world, depends on God fulfilling His promises to Israel, and the Messiah returning to Jerusalem, not to Palestine, not to Hamastan. Yes, it's for you, dear brothers and sisters, that God has restored the Jewish people back to the land so that they can have Jerusalem as their capital and prepare it for the return of the Messiah. We all look forward to gather around the throne, singing the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb. Together, Jews and Gentiles and men of every race and every color, gathered in Jerusalem, coming every Sukkot, sending emissaries from every country and a country that the emissaries are not going to come in Sukkot and celebrate with Israel will not have rain, according to the last chapter of Zechariah, chapter 14 of Zechariah. So stand with us. Support what Netivyah is doing. Even before this war, we were feeding hundreds of families for years. Top quality food. Those hundreds of families were around 1,000 souls for years and years, providing food for every day of the week to these families that the city of Jerusalem sent to us. Yes, this is my plea to all of you. And these are the roots of the war. It's a spiritual, a battle for who is going to inherit God's promises, or who is going to destroy. And that's what the Muslims in Hamas want to do. Destroy God's plan for the salvation of the world. It's not a small thing. It's a big thing. God bless all of you. And please, I very seldom ask for support. This is very unusual for me. But now I'm asking. Contribute. If you need tax credit, contribute to Netivyah USA or Netivyah International. And if you don't need tax credit from the rest of the world, contribute to Netivyah in Jerusalem. It all goes to the same place anyway. So God bless all of you, and thank you. Thank you for praying for us. Stand with Israel. Amen.